when it comes to this particular location out here in Uxbridge, Massachusetts. Now, the first thing I'll say is that I originally had thought that this particular place was in Douglas, and for many years, 12 to be exact. Actually, it's probably more than that now. I searched for this. I couldn't find any remnants of it. I couldn't find anything on Google. I couldn't find anything in way of the other peripheral research. As far as I knew, this place was there and then it was gone. But I was able to get in touch with my friend Michael, who accompanied me the first time I went out there. In fact, he is the reason I knew anything about this particular cemetery at all. He had been there several times and had said, hey, listen, this is very, very haunted. And of course, at the time, having the investigational team under the moniker Dark Hour Paranormal, I was very excited to go out and check this place out. Now, the first thing I'll say is that this was after I had already garnered an attachment from the Rutland State Prison Camp and had dealt with that over, I think it was a 3-month span. And this must have been around 4th or 5th month after that excursion. I was feeling a little bit better, but still very cautious. And, you know, Michael had mentioned that we should go out there. And so what we did is we gathered a few friends from our place of work and we all trekked out into the woods. Now, we're going to get into the stories, my version and Michael's version in way of perception and experience what went on during that expedition, because today, as I sit before you with all of the experience that, of course, many of you have been following at least through the channel, let alone the 30 years I have under my belt with this type of thing, this is one of the most haunted, if not most haunted, outdoor location that I have visited, and I'll give Michael credence for that clarification because there are many dwellings that hold a very specific energy that cannot be denied in way of certain experience. So again, tonight, folks, we are going to be focusing on 2 locations in particular, of course, with the motif that the paranormal can and definitely will, in certain circumstances, at least attempt to follow you home, if not do exactly that. So, without further ado, we like to say on YouTube, I got to get a new catch line here. It'll happen soon. Let's sit down and brainstorm a little bit. Folks, I'd like to introduce to you my good friend, Michael. Hey. Michael, how you doing tonight, mate? Thanks for being on the show with us.
Thanks for having me. You know, I understand you'll get to transition. It comes with time and experience. I understand.
I experiment too much.
I agree. But thanks for having me. And yeah, this particular place that we're talking about is weird in its location and where it is, and not only that, like the experiences that go on about it. And where would you like to begin, Mike? Where in your journey are you curious about this crazy cemetery?
So the first thing I wanted to ask you, because I remember many years ago there was a limited amount of information on this particular place, and when you had brought it to my attention, I was very much interested in just jumping on it. I didn't necessarily know the history of certain things. So my first question I'd like to ask you is how you came about of knowledge with this particular graveyard. And at that time when somebody told you about it, what was your first experience stepping into this location?
So originally I was very I went to school for chemistry, so I had the brain and mindset of like absolutes and theories and laws, right? So I was very skeptical. So a lot of my friends came to me at least with like devil advocate to countering their ideas about spirituality and things like that. And I had a friend come up to me and they're like, you know, I've been to this crazy graveyard and we'd like you to come and tell us what you think. And I was just like, okay, I'll accept the challenge. We could definitely do it. So it was the middle of December. This is like 2008. And me and about like 4 friends go up to the set of power lines. We pull off to the side. It's about midnight. It was new moon, so there was no moonlight. We took some flashlights and we trekked along this path. And then at a certain point, you look to the left and there's this clearing and you go through it and it leads this pathway to this well-kept cemetery in the middle of absolutely nowhere. And my friends lead me there and we approach the graveyard. And initially, I'm like, okay, this is peculiar. We're by high tension power lines. And I'm like, okay, it's got to be aware about that energy. That EMPs are going to make you be nauseous as well as feel and allow things to happen around you. So just to be cautious of it. And so while we were there, we're all walking around the cemetery, and my friend is explaining to me that the myth that I was told is that the last witch that was executed in Massachusetts is buried in there,
Mm-hmm.
and as well as some children that died during smallpox as well as a pox epidemic. So it's just like, okay, interesting, because there are children's gravestones within that cemetery. And so we're walking through, and the first thing that I noticed is that the shadows from the light were off. They didn't match what we're supposed to be. When we were facing a particular way, the lighting was actually reverse, and the shadow was cast towards us. So there was like
Oh,
weird things jumping in between the
from
shadows.
your
So
lights, from your
yeah,
lights out there. Okay, all right,
exactly. So
interesting.
at that point, I'm like, okay, everybody kill the lights. So I'm like, they're like, what? I'm like, our eyes will adjust. We'll be cool. Don't worry about it, you know? So everybody kills the lights, and we're kind of just chilling there in the dark. And at this point, there was this orange orb. It kind of looked like a firefly, where it would kind of pulsate in light, and it was kind of bobbing and weaving between these gravestones. And I was just like, all right, I'm curious, you know. So I take off my glasses because I'm wearing glasses just in case something reflective is causing me to see something, right? I
Mm-hmm.
turned to my friend next to me. I'm like, "Do you see this thing?" And he's like, "Yeah, dude, I don't know what's going on right now." And I'm like, "I know what you mean." And I'm like, and I look around and I ask my other two friends. They're like, "Yeah, what's happening?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I'm gonna go and touch this." They're like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah,
I
I'm gonna
love it.
go and attempt to make contact." And then they're like, "Well, what have happened?" And I'm like, "If I die by contacting a ghost, hell yeah, that would be the craziest thing to go down in history, and I am okay with that." You know, they're like, "What?" And I'm like, "I faced my mortality. Let's do this." So I, start to approach this thing, and about, I would say, 5, maybe 3 feet away from it, it had kind of ducked behind the gravestone, and I could see the light from it. And then in that moment, I could see what looked like a small child
Huh.
standing next to this gravestone
Now
and
let me
just
ask
kind
you
of
very
staring at
quickly,
me.
as you're going through this now, excuse me, when you walk into this graveyard, you come up depending on your orientation, you're going in on a corner. So
Yeah.
when you turn to your right, by the way, folks, this graveyard is not very big at all. I mean, this is a very
Nope.
small colonial graveyard. You can see
Hmm.
this is stonewalled in and walk to one end to the other within 2.5 minutes. So where you saw this apparition, was this on the right side as you walk in? Was it on the left side? Was it back against the wall? Whereabouts did you see it?
It's actually on the left side because it
Mm-hmm.
correlates to the location you went to when we went. But we'll get to that when we tell both our perspectives of what happened that
Mm-hmm.
night. But yeah, as you enter it, if you were to look straight ahead and that stone wall, there would be where the entity that I encountered came across. In that instance, and I'll tell you that this experience made me from a skeptic to complete believer because I could not explain what I was staring at that moment. I looked and turned around at my friends and I smiled and I'm like, I'm going to walk away slowly, you know, and they ran. So I at that moment walked away slowly because I was like, well, if I'm dead, I'm dead now. You know, it's like
No
if they
hurry.
can run, there's no run. I'm already the one farthest away. So
This apparition that's the small child that's formed in front of you, what did the nature of the apparition look like? Was it something that seemed to be more out of your peripheral vision, not sustaining? Was it more solid in way of you could see
no.
characteristics of the person, or was it a
Oh,
shadow? What did it look
it
like?
it definitely it was full-fledged actual corporeal
Oh
uh
wow.
entity. Like, we're talking, like, it looked like I could touch it. That's why I was even hesitant in doing anything in that moment, because it was there, whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And it had soft features, dark set eyes, very long hair, kind of drop down, and then uh, I'd say white, but the problem is that when you're in darkness, everything is shades of gray. So whatever it was definitely reflective in nature. So I would say white. Um, it was draped in white. It had no lower portion, but I
Mm-hmm.
could tell that it definitely had limbs to its side. Um, when I turned around and walked away and got to the corner, I turned back. It was just the orange orb again. So I don't know if at some point it broke its corporeality at that instance. But that is pretty much what happened up until that point. So then we get back to the car, right? And
Okay.
when we get back to the car, this is the winter time. There are children's handprints all over my car.
Ah, shit.
Yeah. So at that point, I was just like, uh oh. It was
Oh,
just like, what's
wow.
going on here?
Okay, so
So
that's indicative of them already being at your car before you were there.
correct. So now we get in the car and we're actually driving back. And at that instance, street lights start fizzling out in instances and blinking out. And we are seeing this shadow following us as we are proceeding home. Um, and, that's when my friend in that car instance, was freaking out. He was like, this might be the witch. And I was like, what are you talking about? That's when I found out about the myth.
That's
And I was just like, this is interesting. And I'm like, and so anyways, uh that's pretty much what happened. We got back to the place. Nothing seemed to had followed us at any point home. Had not known what I was as a person at that point in time, so I did not know that I wasn't, I wasn't something it could attach to. So nonetheless, yeah, that was my first experience and how I got out there. And not only on top of it was it the actual crazy spiritual experience that like kind of pushed me over the edge of starting to question everything, where I'm like, whoa, laws, physics, and chemistry and science isn't talking shit about this. What's going on here? And then proceeding down and seeing there's a lot of connections. And I think that we're at a point where we'll be able to measure it a lot better of what's going on, and that's what really the idea is, being able to have these conversations and put them out there. Personally, I've listened to a couple of your episodes, especially with the elementals and cryptics and analyzing photos, and I very much agreed with one of your statements where you're like, sometimes these are things that impart the energy and make the idea, the entity channel through it like a vessel, and I'm like, you
yes.
nailed it on the head, because that's what it comes down to. It's not that these physical things can be there, but like their impressions can be there. And that's the other
Yes.
aspect of what's going on. And, with what was connected and now how I believe in instances with what spirits are connected to in instances, it would make sense that this graveyard is extremely haunted, because it's one connected to children that were taken from life predeterminately, which is an extreme amount of emotion, and then the same thing for a free thinker such as a witch being burned to death in Uxbridge, Massachusetts, as the last executed witch in Massachusetts. So it's just like these things combined and them being buried here, just crazy amount of like energy. Then also on top of it, you're next to power lines, and then later on, me and Micah found out there's literally a power plant right across the street. And so like it's this weird combination of this area of influx of almost a ley line in a sense. I've
Yes.
talked about it a couple of my friends where I'm like, it's and that's why when we interacted with our job and you came across and you were like, yo, I love the paranormal, and I'm like, boy, do I got a haunted place for you. and
You
then
weren't
you
kidding.
and then you brought up the Rutland prison camps, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's pretty crazy. And I'm like, but this place, man. And so nonetheless, yeah, that was my first experience and what
See,
got me into it, and my history of that place initially.
we didn't really get a chance to dive in to some of our experiences at the graveyard, which together we'll get into that next, or anything that you had really experienced before. You may have mentioned it off the cuff, and I probably put that tuck that into my pocket as some sort of cash to look forward in way of a certain expectation. The fact of the matter is, I understand why certain spirit may choose to stick around a certain location based on something that happened in life. Maybe it's traumatic, maybe it's something loved. Um, the fact that you experienced something in the way of that entity following you home, the first time around, wherein, again, it was at your vehicles before you guys got there. And again, considering that this cemetery is quite some distance from the road. So, when I went into the woods uh, the other day, and I don't remember how much of this I mentioned to you, but, I found the spot. I started walking in. Immediately, I started feeling, this heavy anxiety. Now, you mentioned the power plant, and EMF is incredibly powerful. If they're not drawing from it spiritually, it's certainly giving us a certain feeling, and this has been scientifically proven, the way it acts on people. So maybe this was playing a part. But the thing that started to get me is the further I walked into the woods, I started seeing in my mind's eye something watching me, and it was scornful. And all of a sudden, as I started to realize this out of my peripherals, things were moving. Okay. Not only were things moving and I'd look at it and I didn't see it any longer, I started feeling not only very unwelcome, but almost as if the woods were angry with me. That's really the only way I can describe it. So at one point, as I'm taking a shot and I'm walking and I'm doing the narration, I kind of thought to myself, well, if I'm going to go further on this path, I got to make sure that, I know exactly where this leads to. I don't want to stay in these woods for too long. So I ended up turning around to head back to the car to do a little bit more research. And I'll tell you, Michael, I couldn't get out of those woods fast enough. It almost felt like with those stairs, with that energy, something was pushing me to get out. It was so uncomfortable. And I hadn't even gotten to the location that I had intended to. So again, to bring it back to what you're saying in way of these spirits being able to follow you home. I mean, certainly my experience, it wasn't as prolonged as what I experienced with Rutland Prison Camp, but I think there were a few things that led up to that coming home with me. Although, I don't know, what do you think? If somebody's more sensitive when you walk into a location like this, whether you intend to open yourself or not, do you think you're more prone to receiving an attachment like what we found out in Uxbridge?
So it depends on the entity. So, like for this particular entity that we're talking about with the cemetery, there's more that led into the story. So, not only did it follow us home, it stayed in my friend's apartment for a week and behaved like a child. So, we think in nature that this particular one was based on mischief or not, was more mischievous than it was malicious. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
example, we did a seance in his apartment because initially we were having problems with doors opening and closing and people and somebody locking the bathroom door and us not knowing who went to the bathroom and locked the door. So there was a lot of that, going on, just keys being misplaced and put on top of fridges, just random things happening throughout the experiences of being there post the graveyard. So we then ended up having a seance, and we literally watched a cup fly off the table and shatter against the wall. And we were like, okay, this is a lot more important than it is. So then I was asked to do an expulsion where they were like, because after um, the graveyard experience, I went on a deep journey where I was just like, I will be back, guys. I'll talk to you guys later. And then they approached me and they're like, so what did your research tell you? And I'm like, oh my God, so much. So that's when the seance came up. And then they're like, well, can you do an exorcism? And I'm like, I've never done this before, but I'll give it a shot. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, definitely. And I did. And whatever was there had left. And we they had not been bothered since then. I had returned to the graveyard post that, and actually in that interim, I think whatever was expelled was brought back to it because it was within a 6 month span of me going back to that particular location.
Mm-hmm.
The second time I went to that location, nothing crazy to the degree that what originally happened to me happened there, but it's not something that I always expect. Like I say to people, I'm like, it's not necessary. I don't necessarily want to see, whatever is
Not
living there.
always, man. Not always.
But when it comes down to what lives at the Uxbridge location, before we get to the Rutland location, I would say it's definitely mischievous in nature and probably childlike. I think the expulsion you are feeling might be the, mythos to the witch, or
Hmm.
whoever is there kind of trying to have their place of peace
That's what I felt
be
like.
be be the remainder, like meaning that they don't want people coming in, trudging in, trying to use whatever, is happening there for any particular purposes, for, be it paranormal or non-paranormal, so
You
like.
hit that nail on the head, brother. That's exactly when I have sat, since going over there and having that experience, sat and tried to think, do I go back there? That is exactly what I get. It's not necessarily that they're out there to attack you. They just want to be left the fuck alone. And if you're coming in there for one reason or another, they don't want you disrupting that peace. That's what I'm feeling. And of course, I'm conflicted because, it's my job to document these places. But in
Yeah.
doing so, it draws a lot of attention. I
And
almost said, maybe I should say, well, if I don't tell them the location, could I do it that way? Go ahead. Sorry.
no, no, no. And you're right about what you're talking about is you can't just go into these places. I mean, like, yes, all right, you can and jump into whatever it is. And if you don't think anything's going to happen, in some instances, nothing is going to happen. But there are things that I've experienced going into places and coming back from that I've been like, why has my life turned to on fire and what is happening here? And I've
Yup.
slowly learned that things can attach to your life that kind of set you into, and to be metaphorical, in a different vibrational pattern that makes you act chaotically. That's the best way how I can phrase it, in a way for people to understand that, like, yeah, it takes your personality and warps it around, and then the next thing you know, you're doing all these things. You're like, why am I doing these things? I'm not even on a self journey to find an experience of like what's happening here. And then slowly learning what is my thoughts and what are my actions and what are not
Hmm.
them, and then learning to separate that.
Almost makes you it's the same sort of path that you take when you understand that you might be an empath, right? So you take
Correct.
on certain people's emotions. You know what, I'm gonna say it like this. I think that even in the most negative experiences in this way, and of course I would consider mine to be that, as a whole, there is still a lesson and some real potential for learning in way of spiritual development. And in this case, you're learning to differentiate what's yours, what's not, although it's not necessarily the most preferred experience, you might still have the same result.
And I think you're nailing it on the head, where the lesson is almost something that might be something that we have lost over here. And it
Hmm.
might be something about even respecting ancestry or those laid to rest. And maybe that's what we're not doing, especially maybe putting an EMP, the power lines right there with the power plant, with the cemetery. Maybe they can't sleep because of the amount of
True.
energy being pulsed through them. So maybe there's an issue there.
That's a
Like, that's
curious
why
thought.
that like there are things that I think that maybe correlate that goes on that, and that particular, that's why I'm like, there's just like this weird vortex that's happening. And I know we're talking about going back to that place, and I'm totally open to it. I think it's time that not only that, both of us go, and I think we'll be more welcomed for what it is. But like, yeah, we have to prepare ourselves. We can't just walk into that place, because it will be like stepping on a mine. We never know what's gonna happen or attach to us.
you know we'll
Uh,
ha- we'll have this conversation as we go forward. I mean, we're talking about this, and I mean, to me, I'm having, it's not anxiety, okay? It's a deep rumination of what's there, and I think there's a lot to do with the land, and possibly whatever occurred on that area, and of course everything else you're mentioning in way of support, such as the power lines and so forth. That, all of this plays a part. But even as we talk about it, I get tense here, not in the same way as if I was at the location, but there's this real tight hesitancy. It's tight. You know what I mean? It's hard to describe.
Well, it's just funny because it's just like, even talking about it, I like have already had, the sensation of the hair standing on back of my head, because I'm like, crap, even speaking about her maybe invokes her. Like, and it's one of those things that, like, I worry about. But at the same time, there's fear. But with this particular entity, I'm not afraid like others. Like, this is human in nature. I get out of it, the experience I've had with other things that are not human in nature. So like, that's why I never have had a delay in going there multiple times, bringing multiple people to be able to do that. which leads us into our experience going into it and what happened that night. Uh,
Absolutely.
and I'll tell
Before
you,
I'm
go
sorry,
for it.
let me just say something before you jump into that. Let me just define something that I've recently been able to sort of clarify for myself. There's a very large difference between fear and caution. Okay.
Ah,
Fear is an emotional response, usually reactionary or imaginary in some respects, as to what you expect to occur. Okay. So there may not be any grounding validity in your fear, but that's why we're calling it fear. Caution errs on the side of understanding you're walking into a location that does present some sort of peril. You don't have a reactionary emotion about it, but you're very cautious with every step you take and keeping a sense of your 360, if you will. I just wanted to kind of clarify that before we jumped in this, because as much as I might feel tight about this place or I feel the anxiety, again, these are not necessarily my emotions the way that we describe, and I'm not afraid of going there and I'm not afraid of whatever energy is there. I'm incredibly cautious.
and you're nailing it on the head. Like it's definitely, understanding needing to be cautious and not the giving into the fear, because the fear is the bait, right? So like it ends
Yes.
up that's what they'll feed off of and latch onto, and that's how they proliferate. Because the opposite of fear is love, so it's just like that's how I see how they extrapolate and live and thrive off of it.
Hmm.
But as well as the reverse, if they think if they found something that was caring and loving towards them, they could be able to do that. That's actually, we'll get to that conversation at the end, because that's where I'm at now, is that I invite that. I'm actually that
Oh,
person that
curious.
invites those spirits in to be able to take the next step to wherever they need to go.
Well, I
And
don't think
we'll
there's a better person to go there with than Michael.
exactly.
So, I mean,
Appreciate
take us
that.
back to that night. So, there were, again, a couple elements, a few elements that I think really kind of defined our excursion out there. The first one being that we traveled out with many more people than we normally would. And I
Mhm.
do, at some point in our recountance of this, I'd like to address the fact that one of the participants, a female, apparently had some prior history with interactions. I think it was around the age of 5 or 6, if I recall correctly. And I wonder if that lended as some sort of open portal, perhaps, to what we experienced in the graveyard. But before we get to that point, sure, start us off when we got to the location, what your experience was coming in with us and coming back out, because we had to do a few things before we left the graveyard too, if you recall.
I think before we left the graveyard, I wasn't actually sure what needed to happen. I do know I had to prep certain things before leaving because they needed to. I prepped holy water because it's necessary. And then the other thing I did prep was an amulet of protection, because I was like, we can't just walk into this place with this many people. I know what might need to be deflected if need be. So I brought both of those
Mm-hmm.
with us during that time. Um, yeah, you're right. We went with a decent amount of people, which was interesting, especially considering what ended up happening there.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so once again, we went late evening. And as soon as we got there, uh, I remember walking up to the clearing and going through, and when we got through and got to the main entrance of the graveyard, the obelisk gravestone had been moved, right? So like usually it's in the center location. This time it was in like the back left hand corner. And I was just like, what's going on here?
That's
This
weird.
doesn't make any sense. I've been there and that same obelisk has moved every time. Mike, I've been there like 20
What the
plus
hell?
times, and I'm just like, I don't know what's going on, but the gravestones change formations, and I've taken photos. Like it's one of those other things where I'm like, you guys think I'm crazy and I'm on drugs, but no, there's actual evidence proving it. That's why I'm like, somebody is maintaining it to a degree. I don't know who is or what is, but somebody's definitely maintaining it. So when we got there, I noticed that the gravestone was out of place, and I'm like, "What's happening here?"
Hmm.
And the obelisk one leads to there's one in the back that never moves, and that's the supposable witch's one. I don't know her name. I can't read it. Hopefully, when we get there, maybe we can be able to determine. Even though it's been years, literal years, because this is 2013 that this happened in. I vividly recall that. Um, so now, yeah, so when we get there, I'm crazy. I also brought a Tibetan singing bowl
I
because
remember
that's what
that now you mention it.
it was like I thought it'd be a great idea for us to all sit around and be able to use this sacral G resonating note to be able to get us all in the mood to see what's going on. Upon us immediately doing it, that's when the fog rolled in, right?
Yeah.
So, and this is in the middle of the winter time, so it's just this really weird thing where we're like, where is this updraft of heat happening that's creating this fog? And then the orbs started appearing, and they were everywhere. Like it didn't matter where you were looking, photograph or not. It was just they were. It was like bubbles.
With your naked eye.
With your pure naked eye. That's so we were just like, what is going on right now? And yeah, then I led you over to the location of where I saw the orb initially, and I remember you were doing camera work in the corner while me and a group of the others were investigating the gravestones. And then you came up to me and you're like, we gotta go. And I'm like, okay. It's like, what's going on? And then when we were proceeding to leave, that's when I had to close the gate because I was just like, okay, we've been here. I got to make sure nothing's following us back. And then that's when we proceeded to go. Um, Go for
And
it.
it wasn't just you and I that had the awareness that something was there. I mean, everybody that was in our group, there are probably 6 or 7 people, I think, if I recall. And upon exiting the graveyard when we were leaving, there was one gentleman there. His name was John. Okay, he had even mentioned he felt like something was following us, and I felt like it. So we stopped on our descent back to our cars at some point, and we sent out the affirmation that you're not allowed to follow us. You have to go back home. Do not come with us. And sure enough, yeah, that it certainly it visited me for quite some time. You know, this oh man, it's so hard for me to talk about this even to a certain degree because I've never experienced anything like what I've experienced in that graveyard. So my recollection goes something like this, and I do remember everything that you mentioned in way of the orbs and the way things were being pointed out and observed at that time, the fog, everything like this. And yes, it was winter, but there was no snow on the ground, so it
Mhm.
wasn't a matter of evaporation or anything like that. We got into the graveyard. The first thing I'll say is that I brought 2 batteries for my camera. I had a high 8 video camera, and immediately when I turned the camera on the outside of the graveyard so I could catch the entrance in, as soon as I crossed the threshold, that battery died. It was fully powered. I charged everything before I went. Okay, we've heard this. So I said, what the hell? I put the other battery in, and immediately it went halfway. So I'm like, shit, I probably have a good 20 minutes, maybe half hour to film because, I only have half a battery now. So I thought that was weird, and it took a few times to get things to work electronically. So as we moved through the graveyard, before anything really happened to me personally, I noticed out of the corner of my eye, I'm now in the left side of the graveyard taking stock of what might be beyond the wall, because this was an interest of one of the gentlemen by the name of Chris Kivett, who was with us. I looked over to my right, and one of the gravestones actually snapped in half and teetered and then fell and almost hit somebody. I can't remember who it was. I think it was one of the girls on the back of the heel. Now, when it fell, and I watched it audibly, I had this on video. It didn't make a sound like that thumping sound when you would hear something hit the ground, and thus the person inches away had no idea that this gravestone had almost taken their leg off. So I thought that was really curious, but was very quickly distracted at the very same time when I started noticing some of those small orbs that were off to my left. So I turned my attention, and as I did, Michael, my camera's still on. I'm still rolling. I'm looking out of both eyes here, one in the lens viewfinder and one out into the darkness. I see orbs come at me like this. They rush right through me. As soon as they hit me, I went back like this, like had the camera in my hand, went straight back, lost all balance, and thank God Chris Kivett was behind me and literally caught me and pushed me back up. As he did this, the orbs came back out, and it looked like I was falling into the water backwards, into a pool of water, and seeing the bubbles drift up towards the surface as it came back to me. And I kind of got up, and I was like, it took me a second because it felt like my chest was heavy, something pressing, and he's like, are you sure you're all right? I'm like, I don't know, man, that was weird. I actually had to sit down for a minute. Now, as I'm sitting down and I'm trying to garner my bearings here and kind of right myself, out of the corner of my eye, and now with the naked eye, I'm looking over to the far end of the graveyard, and I'm seeing these wisped apparitions begin to form, but they're moving as if this is sort of a residual thing. So there are many different people sort of bustling about in periodic garb. Now, the curious thing, as I've mentioned in way of this experience before on the show, is that I didn't see the whole apparition at once. So you mentioned the little boy only had, half of himself visible. You would assume that he had legs, but you didn't see it. I would see the legs first moving, and as soon as I looked at that, the peripheral would pick up the torso, and I'd move up to the torso, but the legs would disappear. As soon as that happened, the head would appear, so I'd look at the head, the torso would disappear, and this continued to repeat. If I were to guess, for about 45 seconds to a minute, it was really difficult for me to sustain this. I mean, I was seeing it in the dark. So at this point, I'm here with the camera. I'm trying my best to capture this. I'm still not feeling right. Chris Kibbitt says, let's go out into the woods. And he's pointing over to the left corner just beyond, and I look over there, and I get a bad feeling. He's like, we got to go out there. I said, no, we don't. He goes, no, we have to go out there. I said, why? He goes, there's something out there. I'm like, that's why we're not going to go there. Do you feel what that is? So I convinced him not to go. All right. Mm-hmm. What ended up, I think, fucking us in the most part, or at least myself, was whatever little seance or ritual we did and joined hands around that witch's gravestone. Okay, I know we had the right proper intentions. I know you knew what you were doing in leading this sort of thing. But as I was holding hands, something didn't feel right. It was almost like I didn't want to be a part of that. Something was connecting. There was a current that was moving between us, and I didn't like the feeling, so I broke circle and I stepped away. I don't remember if we had finished. I don't think we did, but I broke circle and I stepped back. So it was very shortly after this that the feeling of oppression, I would say, really was pushing, and that's when I came to you. I said, man, we got to go. But that's my recountance of that experience, and obviously what happened afterwards, with that spirit was more visceral than the one from Rutland. The one from Rutland would take me and dream. It would take me during the day too, but it would really mess with me and dream. It was messing with family members. It was messing with friends. My whole life was upside down. The one that came home with me from this particular place did have an element of intrusion and disruption, but I didn't feel that it was as evil. It was very strong, though. And I'm gonna say this real quick before you comment on what's being said here. When I went to the location last week, okay, I came home and I'm driving the car and I'm feeling myself. Okay, I'm feeling it out. I'm trying to feel how I feel. In case something comes, I'm gonna be prepared. I get home, I don't really feel anything, but I feel a little bit off. And I'm sitting in my chair that night, and I start, doing some research, and all of a sudden, whoosh, here comes this energy right into my room, right up on top of me, and I start vibrating like this. I'm vibrating. I'm like, shit. All right, nope. So I bring in my guides, and I bring in Archangel Michael and his Legion of Light, and they start to push it away a little bit, but the thing is still sort of on the fringes. When I let go in way of attention, shoop, comes right back, so I have to keep pushing it back, right? As this is happening, I'm noticing out of the corner of my eyes these little black orbs. They sort of look like they're crawling along the furniture, and at certain times, when I finally got into bed, I thought that there might have been some spiders crawling on my blankets, and I'm looking around as I see it. I'm like, what the fuck? I'm looking at this. I don't see it. But that night, I didn't go to sleep until about 5:30. I had to keep the lights on, and I had to have some music playing in the background to distract my mind from closing my eyes and seeing whatever face was there once again. Very, very odd place when it comes to something following you home, Michael. Did you have any experiences after the fact? After we left the graveyard? You seem to be very protected, but
especially that particular point, my spirit was super on fire. I am now still, but where I was a younger time, more vivacious in nature. John actually came to me later on and needed to have an expulsion done because he felt like something had also stalked him home.
You're kidding me. I didn't know that.
No, not at all. No, I had to do that with him, which was very interesting. And the result was very interesting because I had to imbue it into an object, and then that object went missing. Like 6 months later. So it's like I've always worried where that object is now, but sometimes that's how those things go. But crazy thing, Mike, is actually to side tangent
Hmm.
comment on is that I do have something of yours that I think might be part of the problem about why you've lost some, protection, and that's your Herkimer diamond. I
I knew
still
it.
have it,
You
and
do.
I have it. And it's been my intention to get it to you. And when we reconnected recently, I'm like, oh my god, I can't wait to give it back to him
Oh, that's
because
so
it
cool,
is time.
man.
Because it is a beautiful crystal in itself. It's the biggest one I've ever come across. On top of it, that's why I'm like, this is Michael's. It needs to go back to him. This is an unbelievable relic in itself, and yeah, it's helped me through my times, but it needs to go home.
Oh,
But
that's
yes, and
very
it will
nice.
return. It's my intention to get it back to you. I have it somewhere. I promise you that.
No, I
But
appreciate that. I really do. I mean, at this stage, I knew this was going where it needed to go, and I had a feeling you still had it in your possession. But if our paths crossed again, we talk. I was never looking for it back because I knew it was working with you. I had the other half because it was once two, and when I had a relationship break, literally the day of, the damn thing just split in two, and in my
no way.
hand without any pressure. And you have
Wow.
the other half. It's just interesting, mate.
Oh, you know what? That's beautiful because even the more connection, because you're right. Like this entire time, I've every time I've had it and have used it, I'm like, man, I hope I come across Mike again because I'd like to return the gift he's given to me, that he's let me use, that was only meant for a momentary, week for meditation, and then time got lost within life as itself. But as everything comes to a close, but I wanted to mention about the Rutland
Yes, let's
entity.
get into that, my friend.
And that is something that I don't think is actually human and is predatory by nature.
Let me
Well,
precursor your story here just very quickly to catch the audience up. Folks, this is the entity that I've spoken about many times that came home for me from Rutland State Prison Camp here in Massachusetts. And what the hell did I want to say about that? Joni Mahan, who you guys have seen come on the show, wrote an entire book on that exact entity that attached to her at one point. So this is the topic we're going to go into. This is the same continuation of that experience. Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
and so yeah, my experiences there is that it's predatory in nature.
Yep.
There is what was the old wine cellar of the remnants of the pox camps there, and it it is like a gateway, it's
It
like
is.
you standing there, you feel it sapping everything out. It is an unbelievable amount of interesting dull energy, but
Mm-hmm.
whatever lives there is predatorial in nature and isn't human. And actually when my experience was there, for my understanding, because I sat in one of the cells just to chill out for a little bit, and it felt like everything that was trapped there was trapped because the entity kept it there and it didn't allow it to leave. And it's not
Yes.
that spirits, they
Yes.
themselves left, but it's actually the entity that would leave and stock whatever was open to coming through to it. And, I'll tell you this, there are many people who go to that place constantly, and it's a very trafficked place. It's gorgeous for taking photos nonetheless. But I always say this as recently where I'm like, I fear, like why? And I'm like, I fear the people who are diving into certain things, not knowing what they're diving into and what they're opening portals to, and what ends
Yes.
up following them back with these things. So I'm like, it's good to learn how to shut doors, because I'm like, that
You
should be
have to.
literally the first step that everyone should learn, is how do I shut a door after I open it. Um,
You couldn't be more right about that. Well said, man. Really, well said.
but so when it comes to Rutland and the experiences I've had with Rutland, it's always been pretty stalker, and it does not want to uh, be welcomed in any way. Like, it is definitely out for blood. That's what I will say. And when it gets what it wants from you, then it takes it away and then leaves. And
Yes.
a best way to explain is most of the time it goes for the heart. That's how I explain it. So like love, relationships, deep
Yes.
friendships, that's
Oh
what it
yeah.
will eat and take from you, whether you realize it or not. And you know, there's some far jumps in saying that, but it just comes into just experiences where I've had where I'm just like, how did a 18-year friendship just end out of midair? And then I'm like, maybe I shouldn't have gone to the Rutland, pox and done some stupid shit there.
I actually know the origin of this entity, at least in a way that it was brought onto that property. And I'm not sure if I had mentioned this before, but Joni had also, in private conversation, verified this. Apparently, there was a group up there at one point during the mid 2000s, and they were over in the tunnel area. They were some sort of ritualistic satanic group, okay? Obviously amateurs, because they opened up something that allowed that particular entity to enter the property. And when it happened, they didn't know how to put it back, so they just left it there. So it doesn't actually have purpose being there. It doesn't belong there. It was raised by something that we did as a species, so to say, and therefore is now stalking around again. With your description of a predatory nature, I could not agree with you more, because that's exactly what it was taking from me. It was taking my energy, it was taking my life, it was taking my dream, it was taking my relationships, taking friends, taking family, taking situations, and everything that I tried to do to truncate this from happening, I failed. The only way I was able to actually get rid of this is because it was always right here. And because it was always right here, I always had an opportunity to face my fear, turn around, and communicate with this, because it kept asking me, why am I here? What do you want? You asked for me. What do you want? But, screaming it. Finally, one day I'd had enough, and I was just, it was like somebody holding a knife to your neck like this, and you're gonna go and
Yeah.
start a new job, and hey, you gotta be professional. But somebody's like, hey, just don't worry about the knife. Just know that it's there. And at any moment, I could do what I want. But it was a feeling of dread
Yeah.
that it just
Yeah.
perpetuated. I looked at this entity in my mind's eye, and I can't tell you exactly what transpired, because a lot of it was built on a faith, if you will. It wasn't a belief system and anything like that. It was that I was going to get through this. I had to face the fire. I had to step into it because I called it to me, and because Spirit honors every request that we ask for, just not necessarily in the time that we ask for it.
Mm.
I realized that that was what was happening, so I had to face it. And long story short, as I did, it must have accepted what I said to it, because it started to back away. And I continued to repeat and say what I was saying, and it would back away further, until it was way out, maybe a football field away, if I were to just give you a
Yep.
visualization here in my mind's eye. Is where it stayed for about another month, okay, before it kind of just poof, it was gone. But immediately after I confronted it, like the world had been taken off my shoulders. I could actually see things brighter. Color had more vibrancy than
Hmm.
what I was doing. Everything was very dull and heavy and tired. I didn't realize it, because it had become my reality. As slowly as it had, it like a disease creeps in and takes over your body, your mind, your soul. This is what was happening. And then finally, when I dispelled that in the way that I did, I realized what kind of condition I was in.
Oh man, that's a beautiful, crazy experience.
Oh, I played with fire, and I just happened to get away with it, bro.
I
That's all I can equate it to.
You know what? I completely understand. I've had my fair share of experiences. I've totally met God in real life, and I've totally met the devil in real life. Both those entities, and let me tell you something. Those are well, maybe for another episode we'll experience it. But I want to get to the Rutland thing and what you mentioned
Yes.
about a cabal opening up a doorway there. This explains the dichotomy that I experienced while being there, where I had the restless nature of the prisoners of the camp that were there, but the oppression of them, with this other entity being there, this displaced entity. And that's what I think it really, I think that probably correlates to a real fact, because even over here in Purgatory Chasm, I've come across some type of ritualistic magic being done at late night. Me and my friends have gone through before, after the closing of the park, just to be just to be knuckleheads, just hang out in the darkness. And yeah, we've totally come across somebody having a bonfire with about like 30 people in masks and robes doing some weird type of ritual. And we were like, okay, so these things are going on. So like that's why I
Absolutely.
inform people. And I'm not surprised that that this is happening. And
Look at
yeah, even
Freetown State
from the
Forest, right?
yo.
Look at Freetown. When you talk about ritual, look at Freetown.
Yep, yep, 100%.
Would you go back to
But
Rutland with what you know now about that entity? Because the reason I'm asking you is because between Joni and I, when we were talking, yes, it was expelled off of her twice, and she felt that it might be gone the second time. But I said, well, where's it gonna go? It's gonna go back to where it is. Originally. Would you
it's
go
def-
back and visit this place?
would I go? Yeah, I would go back to Rutland. Same thing with most haunted places. As long as I prepare myself most of the time, I can deal with usually what most outcomes happen. Uh, but that's a different set of confidence. I explain to people there's a certain thing within my life that I know that I can protect people from the fallout of and be able to absolve. So it's like I don't have to worry about that impact on people, because that's always my precaution is how is this going to affect other people when I'm interacting with a crazy
Right.
spiritual entity.
Right.
Because that's what they'll do. They'll open up pathways through other people to get to you. That's what I've tried explaining to other people. I'm like, be careful, your friends can be your friends, but sometimes things can come through your friends.
I'd have to agree with you that there. I mean, oddly enough, with Rutland, I went with Chris Kibbitt. I don't know if you remember him.
I
And
do.
then there was another guy who will remain nameless at the moment. But long story short, they were the other two guys in my investigational team. And when we did Rutland, the guy who's remaining nameless was outside having a smoke. We were taking a break, and I'm standing on one side of the root cellar. He's standing on the other. I'm actually taking a leak, smoking a cigarette myself, and I hear him kind of go, "Huh." And I turn around. I was like, "What?" He's like, "Did you hear that?" I said, "Hear what?" He said, "The footsteps went right past us into the root cellar." I said, "No, I didn't hear that at all." I said, "Where did they come from?" And he pointed out into the darkness, and he didn't realize it at the time, but he was pointing to where the tunnels were. And I was like, "Oh, that's curious. I didn't experience it." But when we left, and I'm obviously omitting the story of what happened there. I think I've said it a few times. I might make a premiere about it and then let it to rest. But
Mhm.
um, what happened as we got in the car, I'm sitting next to Chris. He's actually driving. The other person took their own vehicle, and I said to Chris, I said, "Bro, I don't feel right." He said, "Yeah, man, that was crazy, man, huh?" I'm like, "No, that's not what I mean, dude. Something's not right." And we
Mm.
started driving off, and sure enough, that was my initial understanding, awareness, rather, I should say, that I had an attachment at that point. But neither Chris or the other person had any peripheral experiences after the fact. They seemed to remain fine. And when I brought this to their attention that I was going through this, I'm not going to say that I was chided, but it wasn't met with an understanding as to why I couldn't continue to do paranormal investigation the way we were doing it. For
Right.
another couple years, Chris was on me. He's like, "Come on, man, let's go out. Let's go out." The other guy was like, "Come on, let's do this." I'm like, "Guys, if you had experienced what I went through, you wouldn't be sitting here saying that. We got to do this a different way."
Yep. And I agree with you because it's just like how only a portion of the world is an understanding of what's going on in the
Hmm.
spiritual realm. I was
Hmm.
explaining to this recently with somebody who was idealistic, and they were like, "Oh, I want everyone to understand." I'm like, "That's terrifying to me." And they're like, "Why?" And I'm like, "I don't want everybody practicing magic." And I'm like, "Do you know how much shit I'd have to defend against constantly?" I'm like, "That's crazy." I'm like, "I'd rather them accidentally be doing magic than realistically, purposely doing magic." And he's just like, "Mike." And I'm like, I know, being selfish, but the idea is that like it comes down to it is that just like what I mean by predatorial, it looks and knows what it can latch onto, what it
Hmm.
can't latch onto. So it's like the other individuals, it would latch onto their lives, but it wouldn't distort it to the point where it would feed off the most. It would still feed, but the effect that it pulled into you, it got the most out of it. So it was
Hmm.
just like, oh, I got a 3-course meal out of you as opposed to a single course meal out of others, or maybe just a snack,
Interesting.
you
Interesting.
know, and then the vibrancy of how attuned you are to your own spirit. That's a big thing, you know. Like usually people who are investigators, there's two types of investigators in my opinion: people who don't believe and are searching for the truth, and those that believe, that are looking for why they're being drawn to
Validation.
those spiritual moments, you know. It's like next thing they know, once they're on that path and they accept it, they're like, oh my goodness, now I'm being pulled in to this crazy path that's showing me all these other types of things that I was unaware of. Now I'm fully aware of, and it's bringing things that were in my peripherals to my focus point, where you're like, oh boy, this is a bigger picture than I expected. I didn't
Uh-huh.
realize, you know. It's like, you know, that pull out moment from the movie screen theater where the set starts pulling in, you see the directors and all the actors, the lighting being done, and you're like, wait a second. You're like, this is more, there's more than just what is happening here. And I'm just like, yeah. And you know, I think we'll get to it, like I said, the point of measuring it as life continues forward and the
Yeah.
conversation keeps going
I,
towards it.
I think,
uh,
by and large, that's what the paranormal investigational teams are attempting to do. Find
mhm.
that avenue that brings about some sort of consensus in way of testing and repetition. Keeping science and, that method in mind. Very quickly, a third phase of Moon. What's going on, guys? Thanks for stopping by and kicking it like you usually do. I really appreciate you coming by the show tonight. They said, "What do you think a ghost thinks about when they're in their realm? Do they think about food, music, entertainment, things like that? We still follow today and enjoy while we're alive." It's a very good question, and honestly, third phase, I think Preston Dennett and I kind of expounded upon this a little bit. But Michael, I'd like to hear your take on this.
So, okay, I'm crazy, right? So I actually don't think spirits have memories, right? So it's like memories are connected to your nervous system, and there's electrical
Hmm.
impulses there that make your personality. But I think that's a big portion of why we've not been able to communicate with spirits as well as they can, as we think we can, is because of the residuation of memory attached to it. But if you are more tuned with your soul through life, you can talk to that particular soul, and that soul will have memories and wisdom that it's picked up through the years. And I say memory, but I mean experiences. So impressions, being like, when you invoke and say, "Hey, were you murdered here?" It's like, "Oh yeah, have the experience of being murdered here." Like
Kind of triggering it.
experiences speak it exactly. So I
Oh,
don't think remember music and your like entertainment and things to that degree, because you could also think about like periodic instances, right? So music and entertainment back then wasn't as vibrant as it is now. And also education, like literature for most of the people before 1700s was absolute shit, so nobody read any books, or so it's like music was kind of like what you could get a hold of in that particular non-secular instances. So, would they remember music? Maybe. Maybe if their life was impressioned by music. So if they were an instrumentalist or had an
mm-hmm.
instrument, then I think that you could hit a tone and be able to channel them within it. Like, let's say if they were a violinist and you played a violin, you may be channeling part of them and their enjoyment out of it. Hence
Interesting.
why I think that entities can also be feeding off of love, and that's the other end. Is that like if you connect with them in a different particular way, it's not an actual parasitic, it's a symbiotic, where it's just like, oh, you're giving love, well, I'll give you inspiration and the enjoyment that I had while living here,
Oh, I like
and
that.
experience from it. So that's something I definitely feel. Same thing with, like, all right, say reading. Well, if they couldn't read but are the writer of the book and had this wonderful experience of like this imaginative world that they created, I think that imaginative energy is still there. So when people read those particular things, you maybe, if you're within that entity's location, maybe you're channeling that particular entity, or even the memory of them creating it, about why they created it. So
Yes.
that's always been my thought about when it comes down to spirits and memories and certain things, and how I think it just kind of breaks down to more experiences than it is actual, like, I remember my conversation with X, Y, and Z, forever and ever. I don't think that that's the case. I can't even remember most conversations. So it's just like, that's why I'm like, I think if I was dead, I wouldn't remember a majority of the things that I went through. But I remember the experiences I went through, but I would remember the small nuances that I had within my life. Like
Sure.
who was my favorite comic book hero, or you know, what did I think of the new Disney movie, or something along those lines.
I think some of that falls into the realm of, I wouldn't necessarily call it ego, but that part of us that's logged um, on a physical level. You talk about neurons, you talk about certain synapses and how information may be carried within our mind, our brain, I should say. As a computer system of sort, our mind, may transcend and have some recollection, but maybe it's limited in the fashion that you describe. I haven't heard that theory, but I actually like that, and I'll be thinking about that as we go forward. Before we end off the show, there's a couple things I want to say. The first is, folks, if you guys aren't excited, you ought to start getting excited, because Third Phase of Moon is dropping their second movie in the vein of Countdown to Disclosure, called Above Top Secret. I believe it's April 5th, and it is going to blow the lid off of this community and honestly anybody else who watches it. I'm not just saying that because I'm such close friends with these guys or that I respect their body of work so intensely. It's because I've seen the movie and my jaw was on the floor. I had to pick it up a handful of times. I felt like this about Countdown to Disclosure. It was an incredibly relevant movie for that time and still has relevancy today, but they just topped themselves with Above Top Secret, released, I believe it's April 5th. Please go and check it out. You guys can pre-order it on every multimedia streaming service there is out there, including Amazon. Just check it out. Above Top Secret, once again, April 5th. The second thing I'd like to mention here, Michael, I'm not sure that I got a chance to speak to you about promoting anything that you do in way of work. Do you have anything that you'd like to convey to the audience in way of what you do, where they can find you, websites, Facebook groups, YouTube channel, email, anything along those lines if people would like to speak to you?
Soon, Mike. Not yet. Like soon.
Okay.
We'll get there. I do, and you know what? When we meet up to go through this graveyard, I'll discuss my idea and have you understand what the big picture is, and we'll be there. Right now, the best way to say is that the best way to get a hold of me is through Mike for right now, and then soon I'll provide you all with ways to be able to get in touch with me, and
that's fine.
like to promote.
I don't mind being the intermediary.
Yep. And it's one of those things that, like, yes, I appreciate this, because I would love to promote you, as well as being able to have that platform to finally take off to the direction that I know I need to, like my actual spiritual calling. So we will get there, and that answer will come to you soon. I promise you that.
Well, I appreciate that, Michael. And when that answer does come, I am going to augment the description down below, folks. If you watch this in the archives after the fact, you will be able to find Michael's body at work, or at least a communication. In the meantime, if you're interested in speaking with him in one shape or form, shoot me an email, darkhourparanormallive@gmail.com, and I will reach out to Michael with your question or inquiry, whatever extent that might be. In the meantime, I'll just close out the show. Michael, if you've got to go, I understand. If you can, stick around for a minute. I'll say my proper goodbyes off camera. Either way, man, this has been incredibly charging for me, up and down in way of what I've been feeling throughout this conversation because of the nature of the discussion. You have been very insightful, and God, I've been waiting far too long to talk to you about. I don't know why I wasn't able to. Well, you know what? Things happen for a reason. There were times that we sort of connected and then continued on our way, and we connect and we go. This time seems a little bit more sustainable, and I like what you said about getting yourself into that spiritual path, that real calling, because, my friend, that is exactly what the fuck I did here, and that's why I'm doing this every single day.
I see it, and I love it. I see it and love it. And
thank you so much, man.
I'll stick around. You say your goodbyes, and then I'll say goodbye to you later.
Appreciate it, brother. Thank you so much, man. We'll have you on again. Believe me.
Hell yeah.
God, I gotta time it better. Hey, listen, this was, again, a very charged episode for me. This was something I was looking forward to because I still have a lot of questions. Now, I learned a bit more about this location out in Uxbridge, this cemetery, this colonial style cemetery. If you're interested in knowing any more about it, you want to know the name, you want to know where it is, shoot me an email. We'll talk. Okay? I'm not going to just drop it out in public at the moment. I just don't think that that's what I should do given how I feel about the place. But if there are some serious seekers who really want to go and experience this, please reach out to me and get in touch. Folks, we'll be back next week with a lot of things coming up here. I don't want to spill the beans just yet, but my God, I've got many things on the table. Taking that working vacation, and I will be dedicating a solid 12 days to just putting time into documentaries, mini docs. You know, I may not do as many interviews because I don't really get the chance to go out as often into the field when I'm working the day job. So I may limit it to maybe one, maybe two over the next week and a half or so, but I will certainly flood you with all kinds of different content when it comes to what you know and love here at Dark Hour Paranormal. You guys are so awesome. I really appreciate your participation. Thank you for the questions, those of you who's asked. I don't get any super... Well, Jesus Christ, I spoke too soon. I was going to thank you guys for all of your support, whether it's tonight or in the past. I really appreciate the super chats and PayPals that you send. Again, it really does help the show. It's providing me the ability to go out into the field, take a few 12 days off of my day job and just commit myself to doing this stuff back on the channel. Tina Mobley sends a nice $5 send-off super chat. Says, thank you for all the hard work and effort you put into bringing us incredible content. Love you, brother. Love comes right back at you, Tina Mobley. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. You guys, moderators and peripheral listeners alike, thank you so much once again for being here. We'll see you next time. In the meantime, stay vigilant, stay explorative, and keep searching for the truth throughout this nebulous field that we all traverse. No, it wasn't exactly the same, okay? I'm allowed to switch it up. Maybe every time. I want to say something else, too, very quickly before we run out of here. I have a very interesting guest coming on in the next couple weeks, okay? He will be one of maybe the 2 interviews that I do over this working vacation. He is releasing a movie in May on abduction, okay? And I saw the trailer to what he's put together, and I can assure you, this is no fluff piece. This is some serious shit right here. I would stand behind this movie 100%. I haven't even seen it yet, but the work that he's put forth is absolutely incredible. I just got in touch with him recently, and I will provide you with more information as the time comes out. Certainly, don't forget about Above Top Secret, dropping on April 5th by Third Phase of Moon, and again, you'll see what happens with this abduction film as time goes on. But in the meantime, you guys have some things to catch up on and get into. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you next time. Ciao.